Okay, how old are you?
36 caliber.
Where do you live?
On the edge.
The Punisher is a third-person shooter hugging the homies simulator, released in North America on January 17, 2005, and in Europe on March 4, 2005. The game was developed by Volition and published by THQ. It was released for the Xbox, PlayStation 2, and PC, as well as having a version released on mobile phones. It also supposedly runs off a modified version of the Red Faction engine and uses Havoc physics. The game follows Frank Castle, aka The Punisher, as he partakes in his own unique methods of population control through the seedy underbelly of the fictional, crime-ridden city of New York, facing off against varieties of Americans, Italian Americans, communists, and the samurai. The game has an original story co-written by Garth Ennis and Jimmy Palmiotti. Original story being in quotation marks, because the game's story takes a lot of inspiration from the Garth Ennis comic storyline, Welcome Back Frank, as well as the 2004 Thomas Jane movie, mixing and matching various characters and set pieces from both while putting its own unique spin on things. We even have Thomas Jane returning as the voice of Frank, which is a very pleasant surprise. There was some controversy with this game before its release. Originally, the ESRB had rated the game as AO due to the violent nature of the game's interrogation scenes, because the rating board had issues with incentivizing and rewarding the torture of your enemies. This led Volition to making various changes to these scenes, such as changing the color scheme to black and white, and zooming the camera more on Frank, obscuring most of the violence from the player's view. Once these changes were implemented, the rating was changed to M, although in the UK an additional zoom was added to the death scenes, obscuring it even more from the player's view. And in Australia, the ACB placed the game on the Federal Department for Media Harmful to Young Persons list. Jeez. But you don't have to worry about all that, because we're going to be playing this game the way it was meant to be played. So the PC version of this game is considered abandonware, since you can't buy it anywhere. And considering who owns the IP, I don't see a re-release happening anytime soon. Originally, I had planned to play the Xbox version on my 360, because that's what I had on hand. I had actually gone out and purchased the 360 recently, and this game was one of the reasons I did so. But about halfway through the game, it started doing this.
Intruder!
I don't know how to fix this, and it's the only game that does this. There's no severe damage to the disc. I have no clue how to fix this. But looking at the footage side by side, this may have been a sign. The higher resolution and field of view really do this game justice, although I'd still really like to know why you decided to do this to me now, game. So I've been trying to find any information or stories regarding the game's development, to not much avail. I've gotten to the point where I'm scrubbing through old game magazines for any behind-the-scenes insight on its development. I got some tidbits from Volition Plays the Punisher on the Volition YouTube channel. Frank Marquardt, a principal artist for Volition.
Next.
Okay.
And so it was kind of a company-wide thing where it was like, hey, we're going to break you up into teams and you guys can pitch games. And then there were different requirements for the games. Like you had to do, like you couldn't pitch like a Tetris game or something like that. It had to be like an action game, a shooter.
Right.
I remember reading, at the time, I remember reading that THQ had had acquired the license for a bunch of Marvel properties. And that was like Captain America and Punisher. And I remember like it was all around this time and we were developing ideas. I went and talked to Dan. And it's like, hey, is anybody making a Punisher game? And so he checked with THQ and nobody was. and then he came back and he said, "Do you want to pitch a Punisher game?"
Yeah.
And so that's when we got together and
That's
started.
awesome.
Stated that the company had an internal contest in order to decide what game they should work on next. The office was divided into groups, and each group was tasked with making a pitch for a game. Around this time, Volition's parent company, THQ, had just purchased the rights to develop games for various Marvel properties, one of which being The Punisher. One of the reasons I wanted to bring this up is because another game pitched during this time was called Bling Bling, and this is another game that is near and dear to me, a game that would later be renamed to Saints Row, and this isn't the only Saints Row connection, so more on that later. Up front, I'm not a very big comic book guy. The Punisher is one of the few comic characters I enjoy. Let me clarify that a little bit. I enjoy some very specific Punisher. Mostly the 04 Max run and Bourne and the Garth Ennis stuff. I like Frank as a character, but not in a world where superheroes exist. I like him most when he's off in his own world doing his own thing. As soon as you add him to the greater Marvel universe, I tend to care less, and that's more because I don't really care about the greater Marvel universe. It's also kind of hard to care about a guy whose specialty is shooting dudes when he's like in the same world as someone like Spider-Man. I don't mind guys like Daredevil or Kingpin showing up, maybe some Nick Fury, like drunken, grumpy company man Fury, but no more than that. I like a more grounded Punisher. I think that's where the character works best. So the stories portrayed in the series I highlighted are exactly what I want out of the character. Frank is one of those characters I feel like I have closure for. Everything I'd ever want for this character I already have, and need not want for more. I don't think I'd ever clamor or be excited for anything new the Punisher could be in. I have some good comic runs, one good movie, one really silly movie, and one good game, and I'm content with that. One last thing before we start. I am playing this game with some mods. First is a widescreen resolution patch, and the second is a decensored mod that removes the black and white filter from the interrogation kills. All the info you need is on the wiki, and I will leave a link to that in the description. The game starts with a cold open. It's always reminded me of how Max Payne starts, beginning at the end of our story with our main character monologuing to themselves. We get introduced to Frank right as he's finishing up some business with somebody. It's kinda hard to tell because these pre-rendered cutscenes are so fucking dark. Frank alludes to taking care of somebody named Takagi. Then he walks outside and surrenders to the police who are surrounding the building. Most of the game's narrative structure consists of flashbacks, with Frank recounting what he's been up to the last 2 or 3 weeks, while being interrogated by Detective Martin Soap and Lieutenant Molly von Richthofen. These are 2 major players in the Garth Ennis story Welcome Back, Frank. The first level has Frank doing the rounds at the local crack house, and we're immediately introduced to the game's flagship mechanic, the interrogation system. Anyone Frank grabs can be interrogated in numerous ways. There's a choke, a punch, a slam, and an intimidate by default, but there is a plethora of environmental interrogations to be found. The interrogations get wilder and wilder as the game goes on, and it is a downright cornucopia of ghoulish, over-the-top violence that is right on brand for Frank.
I just think they're neat.
So how this works is you have to drag the mouse forward and backward, keeping the pressure gauge in the orange zone on the little bar that pops up. Successfully breaking an enemy will give Frank some health and occasionally yield some useful information. We get to practice the interrogation on a few unlucky goobers before the action really starts. Pretty soon we stumble across our first actual weapon, the pump-action shotgun. The gun is good. It sounds punchy and it absolutely devastates these poor bastards, at least up close. We get a 45 here too, and it's no slouch.
Keep it down back there, asshole!
To be honest, almost all the weapons in this game are fantastic. They all sound good and they reliably solve problems. Pretty soon we come across our first special interrogation. The guy with the white skull over his head has something to say, and the place with the white skull is going to help him say it. Now, the kill scenes with these interrogations are the ones that were censored. Here's what it looks like uncensored. So we make our way through the crack house, shooting dudes and helping out the non-hostile degenerates.
Whoa, dude, I'm so wasted. I'm seeing, like, big guys in trench coats.
I see him too. He's probably real.
Maybe we should hide, dude.
We soon reach the man at the top, Damage. That's the dude's name, and he's the leader of the crack house? I don't know how one becomes the leader of the crack house, but it doesn't matter. We throw his ass off the building.
Time to call it a night.
While leaving the now unsafe injection site, Frank almost gets hit by a car. Finding where this car came from leads us to our second level and the beginning of our first arc.
Pokemon cards.
Our second level is a chop shop, and we learn pretty quick that it's run by a Nucci lieutenant named Carlo Duca. The Nucci crime family plays a big role in Welcome Back Frank, seeing as they're pretty much the main antagonist of the story. Here we get our first look at some of the mob goons. This game has some good mob goons, not as good as something like Max Payne, but still pretty good. We finally meet Carlo, and he doesn't have much to tell us other than he works for Bobby Nucci. I figured Frank would have known that already. We throw him into a car compactor soon after this.
He collects the money and gives me my take. Wow! Huh. Ah.
Frank fights his way out of the shopyard and then sets his eyes on Bobby Nucci. Lucky's Bar is Detective Soap's favorite haunt, and another locale frequently seen in Welcome Back Frank. This level is literally 2 rooms. There's like 7 or 8 guys here max, plus the boss.
Hey,
So
do
it's
you
gotta be a
think
headshot.
Daredevil could take Sonny Corleone?
You dumbass lush. Daredevil is a comic book character.
We're gonna die.
You think a level so small they'd have some sort of gimmick to it, but no. Bobby's just hiding in the back and you gotta shoot him in the head a dozen or so times. It's the next level where things start to get wild. So here we get our first actual taste of the greater Marvel universe that this game exists in. We learn that Frank's femcel neighbor, Joan, has been kidnapped by a man named Bushwhacker. Joan is a side character from Welcome Back Frank and the 2004 movie, and Bushwhacker belongs to Daredevil's Rogues Gallery. Bushwhacker is a Catholic priest turned CIA spook turned hired assassin who has a gun for an arm. You know, that sounds like some standard comic book shit, right? Well, when you hear the words gun for an arm, you probably think of something like, Mega Man or Samus or this guy or Nano. But no, it's not what you think. It's whatever horrific Cronenbergian shit this is. I cannot find a picture of this gun arm that does not look fucking abhorrent. It's so specifically grotesque. This was somebody's specific vision. Weird fetishes aside, this freak has our spaghetti-spilling neighbor, and that won't stand. Pretty much the first thing we do in this level is threaten to shove a guy feet first through a wood chipper. But he says he can help us if we let him go. I wouldn't leave you folks hanging like that. Now, you may have noticed something about the gameplay you've seen so far, and that is I spend a lot of time walking around like this, while I'm slowly waddling through the stages, spending some quality cuddle time with an unlucky homie. This is because if you want to get the high scores, this is what you have to do. Every time you get a kill or break an enemy, you get points, and for every 5 enemies you kill or break, you add 1 to a multiplier. If you get hit, that multiplier goes down to 0. And considering a single kill usually only nets you in the double digits worth of score, and your high score is dealing with 5-digit numbers, you're gonna have to rely on that multiplier doing most of the heavy lifting. Using special interrogations and unique kill locations can net you some bonus points, but it's not nearly as much as you need. We throw a dude up on a Mayan sacrificial altar, and Frank makes an offering to the feathered serpent. I always hated seeing all the dead zoo animals in this level. If you had any reservation that the people we're dealing with are cartoonishly evil and deserve the ghoulish violence we're delivering to them, then you need look no further. Should have put more of them through the damn wood chipper. Not much else to talk about the zoo. We get to interrogate a guy with a rhino, and with electric eels. And then we just chase Bushwhacker around some more. He puts Joan in a cage dangling above Piranha like a true scoundrel. He gets away, we save Joan, everybody gets to go home. Except for all those dudes I killed. Who cares about them? We have a funeral to crash. Frank shows up to Bobby's funeral, looking to take out the last two heads of the Nucci clan, Ma and Eddie. So Frank comes up with a plan. It's calculated brutality, matched only by its precision and subtlety.
It's the Punisher!
I've always loved the way this level starts. I'm in my happy place. We fight our way to the basement looking for Eddie and Ma. They're not down here, but we do find some drugs to destroy. Fighting our way back through the funeral home, we find our second boss fight, Eddie. This fight sucks. The first one sucked too, but at least it was easy. This is tedious. Eddie runs around this damn maze and occasionally throws flashbangs. Grab an M60 from one of the goons and shred him.
You can't aim worth this shit! We got numbers on our... Don't fool with the Nucci's!
Any last words, Eddie?
My ma'll never rest until you're dead!
See you later, bozo. With Bobby and Eddie taken care of, that leaves only one Nucci left. Ma. Well, actually, there's a few hundred of them left, and Ma has dragged them all back to the compound to protect her. That's good. It makes our job easier. We run into Bushwhacker pretty early on. He shoots a hole in the floor with his disgusting arm gun, and Frank falls in it. I'm counting that as a successful infiltration. Most of the level is narrow hallways and Nucci's. I love how Ma is voiced in this game. She sounds like such a hateful witch.
You bastard! You're gonna die here, and I'm gonna bury you in my septic tank! No one will mourn you, Castle! No one will even miss you!
Oh, I love it. It's so well done. We eventually find Bushwhacker in the library, and he has one of this game's only remotely good boss fights. We have to shoot his sunglasses off and then throw flashbangs at him to stun him.
My glasses!
My glasses!
Then we just shoot him till he dies.
I'm taking you with me!
You ain't just tough!
Can't leave Bushwhacker like this. He's got so much hardware in him, someone will patch him together again. Have to make a hole too big to patch. That should do it.
You bastard! What are you doing?
disarming you.
Okay, hold up one moment. Frank just done and tore that man's arm off. Like, straight up tore it off. Just popped it out like he was a goddamn Lego man.
I don't smile much. Don't smile ever. But if I did, this would be one.
The mansion isn't doing so hot after the bushwhacker fight. I mean, technically it's really hot. We get a few hints of things to come. We hear in one way or another that Kingpin sent some Russians to protect Ma. Won't do her any good though. We also get our first taste of some of the armored enemies. It's no polar bear, but this'll do for now.
Got what I came for. Time to leave.
With the end of our first saga, this seems as good a place as any to stop for spoilers. If you don't want to see any more of the story, go here. So after drastically changing the gene pool of the local Italian-American population, Frank turns his attention to the Russian mafia? I assume it's the Russian mob, but in all honesty it seems more like a paramilitary organization. Right off the bat we get more of that larger Marvel universe, because Black Widow is here, and is currently being held by the Russians. This feels like a puzzle piece just fell into place after 20 years of playing this game. It did not click until I sat down to write this script, but Black Widow in this game is literally Molotov cocktease.
This comrade.
What the hell are you doing here, Castle?
You're welcome.
I let them capture me, you fool.
Any questions?
Yes, one. What the hell are you doing?
We get a little bit of foreshadowing when we come across the Russians fighting against the Yakuza. The level concludes with another boss fight matching Frank off against a goddamn Abrams.
Shit!
Well, I guess she's dead. You shoot the tank with a grenade launcher. You don't even really have to move out of this corner. The stakes for this story enter the goddamn stratosphere when we find out that the Russians have a rogue nuclear bomb coming in on one of their ships. Frank and Widow each petition to take one of the ships, Widow taking the Red Defender and Frank handling the Igor Baltiski. The Igor Baltiski is pretty straightforward, a lot of narrow hallways, and you just gotta look for places to plant C4. We learn that the Russians are led by a man named General Kripkov. We also discovered that the nuke is not on board the ship, but among the cargo is trafficked women, so we can't sink the ship until we get them out. Don't worry, I'm forklift certified.
I will tell you nothing!
You want to see the place in this level where I lose my combat multiplier? Every goddamn time I play it? Like fucking clockwork. More hallways. The captain has our lady, so we shoot him in the head.
Let the girl go.
Thank you. I must sit down.
And escape the ship. The next mission is very reminiscent of Welcome Back Frank and the 2004 movie.
Need to rearm before hitting the Merc's base. Damn, Joan must have made another batch of cookies.
Hello, big boy.
Frank is attacked in his apartment by a mercenary known only as the Russian. It's not a very interesting fight. There are no guns in the level, and even if there were, bullets don't work on this guy. So you just have to wait for him to do his overhead attack and then jump on his back and direct him towards the gold skulls. After doing this 3 times, Frank throws him out of a window, only for him to disappear moments later. Unfortunately, we do not get to kill him with an exceptionally fat man.
До свидания. That's not good.
That brazen attack on Frank in his home were the Russians ordering an ass-kicking with express shipping, so Frank goes to Grand Nixon Island to deliver. There was a shitty place named after Nixon in the last game, too. I guess authoritarians just really can't get enough of that dick. Dick Nixon, that is. Look at this man. He can fire and load a 50 cal bolt action one-handed. Absolute Chad.
Don't mess with me! Please tell me
Another ceiling fan tragedy. Oh, that snack's for your dinner.
After making our way through various checkpoints and barrackses, Frank meets up with none other than Nick Fury, who's also here to stop the general from firing the nuke. This level, to me, marks the point of the game where everything starts to go downhill, for a number of reasons. First of which is this is where the more, I guess you could say, subdued, or at least somewhat down-to-earth tone the game has had, goes out the window. We're no longer chasing drug dealers and mobsters around the seedy underbelly of New York City. We're assaulting a Russian military installation on an uncharted island to stop them from firing a nuke. Secondly, it's also here that the game makes the decision to embed itself more in the broader Marvel universe. This isn't just the Punisher anymore. We've met Black Widow, and now we're dealing with S.H.I.E.L.D., and the amount of greater Marvel inclusion only escalates from here. Thirdly, and finally, this is kinda where the game runs out of steam, or at least starts running out of steam. The levels feel like they get more abrupt, and it just feels kinda rushed. Kinda like the heart and care that went into the earlier levels just isn't really here.
Passcode is 48326. Please don't kill me.
Bet he was a little short.
We finish this level with another boss fight. It's round 2 against the Russian. This fight sucks. Like, really sucks. The Russian picks up barrels to throw them at you like a Slavic Donkey Kong, and you just have to wait for the barrel to be lit on fire, then shoot it. You only get ammo refills for the bolt action. Occasionally trash enemies spawn to take pot shots at you. After a bit, the Russian gets lit on fire and chases you around, and you have to lead this idiot near a barrel, hope he gets close enough to ignite the barrel, then shoot the ignited barrel and hope you don't get hurt in the process. The Russian's pathfinding sucks, and it's just an overall pain in the ass. At least he's dead. Now where'd that fat man go?
You're too late. Ah!
Maybe not, but you won't live to find out.
We get another pre-rendered cutscene, which for this game is a rarity. My man Frank sprints after a biplane with another grown-ass man on his shoulders. This is big boss levels of athleticism. Holy shit. And with that, Grand Nixon Island blows up, and that puts an end to the Russian saga. Nihonji o jimeru toki ga kita. So, by this point in the game, we have a pretty solid suspicion that Kingpin is behind at least some of these dealings. I mean, enough of these goons has dropped his name, and we know he controls the Russians and the Nucci's, so Frank decides to pay him a little visit at home. This is the first time in the game I feel kind of conflicted about who we're fighting. Before we were just taking on gangbangers and mafia men, but now we're killing security guards? They're probably mercenaries, not just like normal security guards. At least I hope so. I'm gonna feel real bad if I find out these guys are making minimum wage. Kingpin has more than security guards working for protection. He's also enlisted Bullseye, who looks like he's dressed for goth night down at the local barracks. I will give him this though, he at least commits to the bit, walking around with a target on his forehead like a jackass. He looks like someone, but I just can't put my finger on it. We gotta shoot him in the head while he cartwheels around like a jackass. He runs away after taking some damage, and we have to fight him a handful of times. He exists solely to fuck up my score multiplier. We get a P90 here. God, I fucking love the P90.
We're all gonna die!
We continue making our way through Kingpin's security until we reach the big man's office on the top floor. Here we get our final fight with Bullseye. Oh, I got it. He looks like Dean Pelton cosplaying Blade. We get to the top of the tower and kick his ass. After that we get a cutscene, and I shit you not, Kingpin sneaks up on Frank through a secret door. It's not even like the secret door leads to like a panic room or something, it leads to a gym and sauna. Kingpin tells Frank that there's some mysterious third party that's been using Frank to weaken Kingpin's forces. Before more can be elaborated on, the building becomes under attack by the Yakuza. Look at him run. We escape the tower and end the level. The cutscene at the end reveals that Soap was acting as an informant to Frank the entire time. He tells Frank that the man named Jigsaw has been behind the Yakuza attacks. When we get back to Rikers, Frank's lawyer finally shows up, and it's none other than Matt Murdock. He doesn't last very long though. It's like somebody said, hey, you're gonna have to pay for the Daredevil license too, so they just yeet him right out of the story. After the tower, we have a choice of two filler missions. A meatpacking plant used by the Nucci's to ship drugs, where we get some three-way combat between the Nucci's and the Yakuza. That's about it. And, if you're unlucky, you get to meet the invulnerable Nucci. He exists only to spite your score multiplier. Oh god, he's following me. The other mission is Pier 74 Revisited. We basically get to go backward through the level, except now there are shield dicks getting in the way. We do see more of the armored Yakuza goons show up. I always like the look of these guys.
Watch your fire!
Nice armor.
What?
Looks like the docks are clean.
Check your aim! Help! They're gonna kill us! Surrender or die!
That's about it. I mean, there's a brief bit where you gotta disarm bombs attached to generic NPCs, but, I mean, you just gotta walk up and press a button. Neither of these levels are very interesting. Both feel rushed. They're missing something. They're missing something the other levels had. They just don't hit the same. I'm not entirely sure what it is. Could just be the gameplay loop becoming a bit stale, which is definitely a factor, but it feels more than that. Feels like the levels forego the creative set pieces and the little environmental interactions that existed in the levels prior. These start to feel more like just bland shooting galleries. After the filler mission, we get to go to Stark Towers. Remember, Frank, blend in.
Our technicians are building the world of tomorrow today. Everyone, please stay calm. Security is on its way.
What was that, Dr. Freeman? Maybe the quantum physics group finally opened that extra-dimensional portal. Extra-dimensional aliens! Wonder what they look like!
A resonance cascade would be the second worst thing to happen to this guy today.
Help! Help!
This is a pretty ballsy move by the Yakuza, attempting to break into Stark Industries to steal Iron Man tech. It feels weird for the Punisher to be handling a situation like this. Although this was before Iron Man became king of the world. Pretty sure at this point Tony was mostly known for being an alcoholic, more than anything. The level is pretty straightforward. The only thing I noticed is that all the sections in this level were extremely short. And the game really, really likes spawning enemies behind you and in your blind spots. It drives me fucking crazy. We get to fight a helicopter, because of course we do. To be honest, this is probably the best boss fight the game throws at us. That's just because we get to melt people with unlimited law rockets.
What are our losses?
Still sweeping the building, sir. Looks like at least 50 guards, 20 scientists, and a few tourists.
What were they after?
Some blueprints were stolen from design, and several pieces of iron tech armor are missing.
And where's the Punisher? I saw him in the middle of things.
Missing, sir. We're not sure why he was here.
But we do know he was here.
Castle knew something. Find out what it was.
Yes, sir. There was someone with Castle. Came on the tour with him and left with him.
And?
Well, sir, he stole some things from the labs. Paper clips, a hole punch, and some scraps of metal. Should I contact the police?
I need a drink.
Now it's time for the penultimate level, the Takagi building. It's time we have a little chat with Mr. Takagi about these Yakuza shenanigans. We have to make it to the penthouse suite, and to do so we have to fight our way through a high-end techno dance club / Japanese restaurant. Because Takagi-san is all about the culture. I feel like this level tries to be more interesting than the last few. So we grab one of the commanders dressed in white armor and keep him alive long enough to use the retinal scanner. But that's really the only thing we have to do. This level is another brief one. After that, we get to meet the man himself. Takagi tells us that Jigsaw has taken control of the Yakuza from him. He also lets us know that thanks to an anonymous tip, Jigsaw is currently on his way to Riker's prison, but the Yakuza aren't planning on letting him stay there very long. As a final request, Takagi asks to be killed with his katana, which, of course, we oblige.
Saw's men.
Now we have to survive. We have to get to Takagi's old office and initiate the secret exit, but unfortunately, we're gonna have to wait about 5 minutes for that door to open. There's a lot of standing and waiting going on. We do get one of my all-time favorite weapons, though, the Daewoo USAS-12. Too bad we hardly get any ammo for it. Daewoo aside, it doesn't change much. This part still sucks. After we escape, the story loops back on in itself. We get treated to a similar cutscene the game opened with, except we get to see Frank tell Soap to send him to Rikers while he's being arrested. Rikers starts in the interrogation room when the Yakuza begin their siege on the prison. Frank knocks Molly out with what I assume is a rag soaked in chloroform. Where was he keeping that? This level is okay. It's not the best the game has, but it's definitely the best level post Grand Nixon, at least in my opinion. A lot of the early fights are with you against other convicts before the Yakuza start showing up. The last normal area is probably my favorite in the level. You're fighting through the prison administrative sector and these narrow hallways with a lot of windows and offices. The Yakuza pour out of them. It's pretty good. What's not good is the last boss, John Saint, aka Jigsaw. So in the game, Jigsaw is named John Saint, but in the comics, Jigsaw is named Billy Russo. John Saint is the dude the Punisher killed with the Claymore in the 04 movie. Soap also mentions that John Saint was the guy who killed Frank's family, which is a movie thing, not a comic thing. That implies that this game could be a sequel to the 04 movie, but things that already happened during the movie also happened during the game, like the fight with the Russian in Frank's apartment. I know that this game exists within its own continuity. It just feels kind of weird before it seemed to be taking inspiration from the movie and the comic instead of pulling directly. This means little in the scheme of things, and I'm only going on this little tangent because I don't want to talk about the boss fight. Because it's horrible. So Saint is flying around in bootleg Iron Man armor, and you can't damage him from the front. So what we have to do is get behind him and shoot his jetpack. But every time you get behind him, he just turns around, leading to this drawn-out fight where you're trying to get a line of sight on the jetpack, but Frank moves at a brisk jog against an enemy that can just fly and just immediately turn around. I think what you're supposed to do is hide and take pot shots at his back when he doesn't see you, but that would take forever. So what you actually do is you stand under him and unload on the jetpack. After that, he crashes to the ground and you have to place mines, which only show up during this fight on the walls, and then lure him into the mines and detonate them. Rinse, repeat, until he dies. It's a pain in the ass because he can destroy the mines on the walls with his attacks, and just like the Russian, his pathfinding sucks. The mines also spawn on the opposite sides of the arena, and the pickups only give you one. So that brisk jog Frank runs at becomes the most annoying thing during this fight. The single respawning enemy that's up here too might also drop a mine, I'm not entirely sure. That dickhead exists solely to take pot shots at you while you're trying to deal with Jigsaw. After the fight is done, we get our final cutscene.
Release your hostage and you're free to go! You have my word!
released into your custody.
And in true Marvel fashion, if we stay a bit after the credits, we get a sequel teaser setting up Kingpin as the big bad for the next game. The Punisher is a third-person shooter releasing in a weird in-between time for the genre. The near perfection that is Max Payne 2 had released a few years prior, and the cover-based stop-and-pop gameplay of Gears of War that will overtake the genre won't be seen until the coming year. The Punisher exists in sort of an in-between gameplay-wise. Frank's approach to combat isn't as fast and frantic as Max's, but he's also not doing the cha-cha slide between cover like the COG. Let's start with the good. In terms of core gameplay, I think the game really holds up. It's not groundbreaking or even particularly unique, but it does everything it needs to do and does it well enough. It gives you a bunch of weapons that sound great and that are fun to shoot, and gives you a bunch of targets that are fun to shoot at. Most of the enemies ragdoll when killed, and while not having the most dramatic ragdolling, it definitely makes a nice touch. Also, depending on the weapon you're using, you can take off enemy limbs and heads with your shots, which is always satisfying. All the parts work well together, and for your power fantasy game, that's all you really need. There are a lot of little flourishes and details in the gameplay, things like being able to shoot enemies in the arm and make them drop their weapons, and seeing them pull out a sidearm or scramble to pick up their fallen gun, the little callouts enemies have when they accidentally shoot each other or shoot the poor bastard you're using as a shield. Enemies sometimes cowering or throwing down their weapons when you burst into a room or pop enough of their friends. These little touches feel appropriate for the Punisher as a character. A similar thing could be said about the environments, with various items breaking with gunfire, some even being environmental hazards that could kill enemies. It's little bits of personality that make the game stand out in my mind compared to other third-person shooters, and I appreciate all those little touches. I think the interrogation mechanic does a nice job of breaking up the shooting gameplay. It really helps to give the game some more of that personality I've been talking about. It helps it feel unique. Not to mention the entertainment value of the ghoulish, over-the-top violence depicted in the special interrogations. It gives the player something else to do aside from shoot stuff, and it has enough gameplay incentives attached to it to make it something the player would want to do. Aside from just shooting, Frank can go into a slaughter mode after filling up the little blue bar under the health bar. The screen goes black and white, Frank gets unlimited knives to throw, and he becomes nearly invincible. His health regenerates, and he gets a slew of new quick kill executions. He might also get a bit of a speed boost, but I'm not entirely sure. It's hard to gauge how fast he's going. In all honesty, I didn't use this mode that much. It just feels kind of out of place. The quick kill executions are neat, but the throwing knives kind of lack impact and have a really long windup. I used it a bit more than I normally do, solely because I was playing with the black and white filter removed, since now I could actually see what was going on. While doing some research, I did stumble upon some oddities considering this mode. I read that multiple articles where they described Frank being able to slow down time and target individual points on an opponent's body, or this official Australian PlayStation 2 magazine article describes the mode slowing down time and how Frank can target multiple enemies independently with each pistol, or this P2 magazine describing nearly the same thing. None of these articles I found described the mode that's actually in the game. At first I thought maybe it was like a regional difference, perhaps the rating boards didn't like Frank using knives so they changed it, but I could not find any evidence of this being the case. So this leads me to believe that the slaughter mode went through multiple different iterations during the game's development, probably starting off as a standard slow-mo ability and then changing quite a few times during development. Almost every level has a challenge map and a wave survival map, both of which are cool ideas, in theory. While the challenge maps are neat, I found a lot of them really difficult to pull off. I know they're challenge maps, and of course they should be a challenge, but a lot of these were either tedious, like killing Eddie Nucci with only headshots, or getting 10 times more kills than Black Widow, or beating an entire area of a map without reloading or changing guns. Or they were some form of timed trial, And none of these really fuck around. Like, whatever challenge they are, they seem to just give you the bare minimum you need to complete the challenge. It doesn't feel like the challenges were designed in a way that you could get better over time or get better scores. You either finish the challenge or you fail. Like, there's no in between. They all have such a small margin of error. It almost feels like you're doing like a combat puzzle where you have to figure out the perfect way to proceed. There are no alternate ways. That's not to say that it's bad, it's just always struck me as kind of weird. The same could be said about the punishment mode, or the wave survival mode. Almost every level has this mode where your goal is to get a certain amount of points before dying. This is a cool idea, in theory, but once you factor in how the score multiplier works, it becomes extremely tedious. I kinda hate how the scoring works in this game. Like I said before, every 5 kills or interrogations without getting hit adds 1 to the multiplier. Get hit once, and the entire multiplier is gone. This doesn't sound too bad, but when you consider there's such a small margin of error you're allowed to have, to get these scores you basically have to get through the entire level without being hit, and get some special interrogations or special kills in. And later on, the sections of the levels get shorter and shorter, and you can't keep that multiplier going in between load zones. The game also just loves spawning dickheads right behind you or right in your blind spots. It's so goddamn aggravating having a combo going just to instantly lose it because some jackass appeared out of thin air, and knowing that no matter how well you do, you're not going to recover from that. The system itself also just promotes playing the game in the safest, most vanilla way possible. You have all these great animations for quick kills and melee weapons, but if you want that score, you gotta do the thug shaker with some unfortunate jackass through the entire dang level. It feels like a similar zero margin for error design philosophy went into the scoring system that went into the challenge maps. And while I hesitate to call this philosophy bad, per se, it's just definitely not something I enjoy. I feel like the censorship also did a really subtle number on the game as well. At first you would assume it was all just visual stuff that got censored, but it affects the scoring as well. When you kill an enemy during an interrogation, even after breaking them, you lose score. The game was designed around you doing that. Hell, usually when you do that, Frank usually has some unique quip or something to say about it.
Rainforest! He's heading there! Let me go, please!
Next time, stay 6 inches from the curb.
And I wouldn't be surprised if before the censorship, it gave you score to do that. It makes me feel like changing that borked the balance in a very subtle but important way. I have no way to confirm this, but it's just a hunch. Going back to the interrogations, while they are neat, some of these just feel like they straight up don't work, or they break while you're trying to do it. Sometimes I'd accidentally kill a dude but barely raise that bar, and sometimes no matter how hard you tried, you just, the damn bar won't raise. I'm over here shaking the damn mouse and the guy is just not having it. It feels inconsistent, and inconsistent enough to where it's definitely noticeable. It's not game-breaking, but noticeable.
Oh! Oh! Ah! Oh! Oh! Ah! Oh! I am new here. They tell me nothing important. Ah! Oh!
Overall, what's here is definitely enjoyable. It's a solid third-person shooter. This game looks surprisingly good for a 2005 game. Areas have good lighting and most feel genuine. What I mean by that is that most areas feel like real places and not video game shooting gallery levels. The model work for the most part is also well done. A lot of the enemy models are kind of undercooked, with some textures for clothes and hair looking lower quality, but they all have some pretty good facial animations, and you can really noticed that during some of the interrogations. I noticed during my playthrough that a bunch of the models had these weird heads at a certain distance. I think this is due to the higher field of view and the bigger resolution. Does look pretty funny though. I mean, you got fucking Pinhead over here. The one model that really stands out is Frank himself. This model looks downright fantastic. The face and the costume are both really well detailed, definitely invoking Lawrence Campbell Punisher Max vibes. Frank's coat is also worth mentioning. It might not seem all that impressive now, but the way it flows with the player's movement is just really damn impressive. I imagine making flowing clothing like this is a bitch to do even now. So yeah, a lot of work went into this coat, and you can tell. Damn fine coat. The game has a bunch of little comic book flourishes that I like. Little things like subtitles and tooltips, and even the weapon pickups presented in these little comic boxes. It's a nice little flourish, and I like it. I'd definitely say this game is above par on terms of its visuals. But how does it sound? The voice cast is pretty good. We have Thomas Jane reprising his role as Frank, and he does a bang-up job.
But... Add a noun and a verb, and you've got a sentence.
You're supposed to be dead.
I've heard that before. Be my guest. The Nucci's, Cardinal. Why are they here? What's the connection?
Please! I just take orders from Bobby Nucci. Don't hurt me.
Let's talk outside. It's getting kinda close in here.
His voice is one of the voices I hear in my head, especially when I read any comic involving the Punisher. Aside from Jane, we have a lot of career voice actors, all of which do a bang-up job. There are a lot of really good mob goon voices in this game. Not quite on Max Payne's level, but it's definitely up there. A lot of, "Oh shit, it's the Punisher!" and "You got a big rep and a little dick." Those two call-outs always stood out in my mind. And the occasional, "Ah!" when you grab somebody, it's too good. They also do this thing where all of Frank's internal dialogue has I'm not sure what you would call it, like an echo kind of, but it has an effect on it that distinguishes it from the spoken dialogue, so it sounds like it's in his head and not being said out loud, and it's a little touch that I appreciate.
No welcoming committee.
Louis, how many bodies you dug down this well?
The soundtrack for this game is surprisingly good, like startlingly good. For the longest time I had thought they used the same score as the movie, but that's not the case. The soundtrack is composed by Sonic Fuel, which is made up by Christopher Lennertz and Tim Wynn, who are both veteran composers for not just video games, but films and TV as well. There was also some additional music done by Jared Marino and Corey Jackson. The soundtrack has a lot of operatic and symphonic sounding tracks. It goes into some more beat-heavy, techno-ish action-y tracks as well. I'm sorry, I'm still not very good at describing music, but it's a really good soundtrack, and it really fits with the game. I can't explain why, but it fits in my mind. It just fits Frank's character wonderfully. Overall, definitely above par. I'm glad I played through this again, especially after the last one. I love this game dearly, but I also don't like leaning on my nostalgia goggles, so it definitely has some problems. The gameplay loop starts to wear itself thin, the AI can be really dumb at times, the bonus game modes are kind of meh, the levels in the last third feel rushed and they kind of suck, the boss fights are awful, but despite all of that, the game is still a fucking blast to play. It's everything I could have wanted for a Punisher game. Give or take some small nitpicks with a few story decisions, I don't know what I would change about this game. It was the perfect time and the perfect studio to do a game like this. While not being a perfect game in its own right, it's perfect for the character it was created for. I don't know how you do a better game for the Punisher than this without falling into the trap of just making another generic GTA clone. Speaking of, I said earlier that there would be another Saints Row connection. So, a sequel to this game was almost immediately put into production, and was going to be an open-world GTA-like game. Volition was already working on their open-world GTA-like game called Bling Bling, later renamed Saints Row, So they decided to use that same engine for The Punisher 2 Sandbox Punishment. I assume that was a working title, because that couldn't be the actual title. The game was abruptly canceled, but I just thought that was neat. From what little footage we have, the project, you can see that it looks exactly like Saints Row. Like, it looks exactly like Saints Row 2. The animations, the cars, the city. I'm pretty sure the shotgun model used is the exact model for the tombstone in Saints Row 1 and 2. It isn't really important information, but Saints Row 1 and 2 are some of my favorite games, and they were formative games from my youth, just like this one was, and they're very near and dear to my heart, and so is this one. And finding out that these games had such intertwined developments just kind of tickles my heart, I guess. Alrighty, so in closing, the game is good. If anything in this video looked good to you, you should definitely give it a shot. It's free after all, so you got nothing to lose. And with that brings us to the end of this video. That's another one down. It's I don't know what I'm gonna do next. There's a choice. I have a choice between two games. One of them is a GameCube game, which it's an obscure GameCube game that's near and dear to my heart. And the other is a obscure PS2 game, which is not, which is just slop. It's not good, but it might be entertaining. So it's one of those two, but we'll see how it goes. That's all for me today. You all take care of yourselves, stay safe out there, and I will see you again sometime soon.